Hey you guys, it's Peter, and welcome to my channel. Peter likes books. Alright, so today I'm going to do a review of Colson Whitehead's The Underground Railroad. And this was the group book for Diversathon. This is also kind of my Diversathon wrap-up because I actually only read one book for Diversathon. But what's really interesting about this is, I had another book that I was reading and I didn't really finish it. But what's really interesting about this is, had it not been for Diversathon, and had it not been for the Diversathon group, the people, administrators putting it together, I would not have read this book. Adotto at He Reads and I were supposed to read this book earlier this summer. I started it and really couldn't get into it. I was very confused by the names and all that kind of stuff. And literally when I went back, because I listened to it on Audible, I was only 20 minutes into it, so I didn't even really give it a chance. If you start this book and within the first, let's say, 50 to 100 pages, want to put it down, or you're very confused by it, keep reading, okay? This is absolutely a profound, prolific, probably one of the most important novels of our time. I was absolutely blown away by it. And what it's about is, it is about a girl, and her name is Cora. And Cora comes from, her grandmother came over from Africa as a slave, and then her mother, Mabel, lived on a plantation and then had Cora. And I don't really want to tell you the background story of Mabel because it kind of weaves all the way through the book. And actually, I loved how the end of the story with Mabel ended, because it didn't end the way that I thought it would end. It was very unexpected to me, but perfect in the story. And what I really loved about this book so much was that, yes, it was a historical study of slavery in our country, but it was also a very exciting, interesting read. I said this in a vlog that I did for Diversathon, but it was almost kind of read at times like a suspense novel, because it was Cora's escape from this plantation via the Underground Railroad, which my ignorance and the lack of education that I had growing up about, the Underground Railroad was completely educated throughout my reading this book, because there were so many things I did not know about the Underground Railroad. In fact, I was so ignorant that I thought the Underground Railroad was more figurative than literal. I didn't realize it was actually a railroad. I mean, how ignorant am I that in the United States in 2017 that I didn't actually realize that there was a railroad that ran underneath the ground. I didn't, and I'm embarrassed to say that, but I just didn't. But even more so than that, to hear the story of slavery from one slave's point of view, and how grateful I am for my life, how grateful I am, and how grateful I should be on a daily basis for where I grew up, where I was born, who I was born to, the time that I was born, all of those things, because a mix of circumstances could completely change that for any of us. It really made my eyes wide to the luxuries of the world that I have on a daily basis. Not only is this a story and a history of slavery in the United States, but it is also a history of white privilege in the United States. And as a white man reading this book, it is undeniable that the book is very uncomfortable at times to read. And, one of the points of Diversathon was to make us feel uncomfortable, to read from somebody's point of view and having a point of view that was uncomfortable for us to read. And whereas I am not uncomfortable with Cora's point of view, reading it as a white man, being ashamed of how the white people acted at that time, the ignorance, the language that they used, the behavior, all of it was tragic. And it really made me uncomfortable to read at certain points, especially when you realize that we're talking less than 200 years ago. And, that I could have direct lineage right to that. And what was interesting, if you watch my Diversathon vlog, was that I said in there that at one point I was I'm so ignorant living in Indiana that I didn't even know, does Indiana have slaves? Does Indiana, did slavery exist here? Now, what's interesting is at that point I was only halfway through the novel. What I did not know is, and this won't ruin it for anybody, but the whole book ends in Indiana. Indiana is a huge part of this book. And so then I went and did some research afterwards, and I was very interested to find out how Indiana played into the whole realm of slavery. And I sat for hours just like going through, like reading all these articles about Indiana and the Midwest and free states and things like that. And so this book really educated me as far as opening my mind and opening my eyes to things. One of the things I actually thought about while reading this book, and I don't really know where it came from, but it was, there's rape and violence in this book. So I should put a a disclaimer on this video that if you're going to read this book, I mean, it doesn't have graphic rape or violence. I do think that you assume those situations, but it's not graphic in reading it. But what it really made me think about was, especially as somebody that has worked in mental health for 20 years, is that one of the things I never hear discussed when talking about slavery, but we talk about it with other people. There was a part where they related slavery to a war. I just don't want to ruin parts of this book because I do all my reviews spoiler free, and this is a book that everybody should read. I almost kind of feel like it should be mandatory reading, honestly, and I hope at some point this becomes mandatory reading in our school systems, because I can tell you as a white person, as a white student, I was never educated on the true knowledge of the Underground Railroad or what slavery really was like. I just really had a kind of jaded rose-colored glasses idea of all of that. And now it's just making me want to read more and educate myself more on it. And especially working in the mental health facility or mental health area of the world, because we talk so much about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, and anxiety and panic attacks and things like that. And one of the things that I think is really interesting is how many of these people, these slaves, that while they were on the plantation, violence is a huge part of their life on a daily basis. Rape is a huge part of their life on a daily basis. Had to have suffered, panic attacks, stress and anxiety, post-traumatic stress disorder, I would have to think would be a huge part of their life. That once these slaves were freed, their children, and then we didn't talk about those things back then. We didn't address those mental health issues that today is such a huge part of you hear people and you'll say oh, hi, it's really nice to meet you. And they'll be like, oh, well, I'm Judy Smith and I'm bipolar and I have PTSD. And you're like, oh, okay. We talk so much about panic attacks and anxiety. And if you get anywhere on YouTube, you can see it all over. But we had all of these slaves that once freed. Were these issues addressed? I don't think so. I don't think we knew how to address that. And there's a part in the book where it does kind of talk about that a little bit. It talks about there, at the point where there are more African Americans in the United States and in the South than there were white people, and what would happen if they just set all these slaves free. That's addressed in the book at one point, not at length, but they talk about it. But really at the heart of this book, what I love so much was the character of Cora. She never gave up. She never broke down. She was a strong, strong woman, and I gained strength from her story. It moved me. It made me cry. It made me hopeful for, a different world. If this is where we're at 200 years out, and I know when I say that, the immediate thought in my head is we're really not that far away from it. I still today see after reading this book, so many injustices in our United States that are directly related to slavery back in the day that you don't even see on a daily basis, that I walk through my life and I don't even realize, oh there. But now, having read this book, my eyes are awake and I do see those things around me, and I hope I continue to stay open and teachable and remain that way so that I can continue to see those injustices and stop them when I think that they're not right and do something about them and be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. So for me, this book was eye-opening. It was absolutely beautiful, and it was an amazing read. I gave it 100%. I gave it not 5 stars. I would give it 1,000,000 stars. I thought it was fantastic, and I hope one day our children read it as mandatory reading in all school systems. So let me know in the comment section if you guys have read this book and what you thought. I love you guys. My social media is all linked below, so please follow it, and I will talk to you later. Bye.